Okay, so this detour isn't that big a deal. And now the phone is actually in a cradle. And I also remembered who I wanted to try and talk about this to. And that's, I'm pretending that I'm giving a shift report about myself to my colleague that I used to give shift report to from, let's see, it was probably like, to varying degrees, like 3 years that I would give shift report to this pretty much same lady. So, let's see. So I think it's not that this older sister wasn't somebody who's always late. Let's put it that way. It's not really a diagnostic category, but and I mean, technically, I don't know if my father ever made us late that often, but he would like sit there and mutter curses while you were making him be late. And my husband probably actually views me that way. But anyway, like, I don't know what mile marker I'm at, but there's this really interesting house here along West 84 that I kind of like. We're just north of Burley right now, but anyway, I'll make a note of that, and maybe I can show it to my husband on Google Maps. So, so I think that who you kind of are, maybe let's say your temperament, which I don't necessarily agree is inborn. I think it can have, the goodness of fit between your situation and your temperament can have a lot to do with your birth order. So, so this oldest sister, because she was the oldest sibling, it didn't cause a lot of friction for her to be very, cool with making other people wait. Whereas the third child, my older Irish twin, she, it wasn't very cool for her to be making people wait, because, who does she think she is? And then, of course, the eighth child, the eighth of 9 children, she, was also like, wait, who do you think you are? But it's okay. It's funny because there was kind of like, and perhaps the best argument for keeping in mind that there was actually 10 of us is that the birth order was actually girl, boy, girl, 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 boy, girl, 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 boy. So it was 3 girls and a boy, except for starting with the youngest girl. The other funny thing is that some of us have black hair, or basically black hair, and then some of us have kind of a middle brown hair. And I used to try and draw generalizations about that as if we were domesticated foxes who you could tell anything about us by our spots. Because I guess domesticated foxes, like as they refined the breed, they all acquired a similar like spot pattern. And I guess people who breed dogs, they think that the spot pattern of the dogs is an important part of the breed. And the characteristics of the dogs. Anyway, that's the kind of thing I used to think more back when I only had a degree in liberal arts. was pretty sciencey. Like your melanin, must have something to do with how tame you are anyway. But so I never understood what schizotypal meant. My sister, who's a psychiatrist, she has tried to explain it to me sometimes, and I don't know if it's like when she's explaining OCPD to me, as if, this is probably something that you should think about. But so I think that due to my imprinting from my mom, that if my mom had schizotypal tendencies, then I had some schizotypal tendencies. But the thing you'll learn about me, this whole point of this kind of dialogue, is that that diagnostic categories are not very cut and dried. Like, even if you only take my official diagnoses that have been made by mental health care professionals over the years, I'm kind of all over the place. And this is something that, okay, so I have a kid who's currently 20, and so they have been diagnosed with ADHD and autism and anxiety disorder and now borderline and also depression, and the weight of all those labels, just was really frustrating to them. And I'm like, well, so let's not worry about the anxiety disorder so much, like, because bipolar is a pretty big deal and autism is a pretty big deal. Although really for them, by the time you factor in everything else, really the ADHD is the big deal. Because the ADHD is the thing that makes it so that they aren't just basically neurospicy, which it's arguable whether I'm neurospicy, which means you're not really somebody. We'll have a whole other thing about this, about neurospicy and actual, what does it mean to actually have a disability and things like that. But like, since I was able to grow up and get married and pass on my genes and complete college kind of the first time, that I would kind of say I'm just neurospicy, or a slightly sciencier term is broader autism phenotype, which is something where you have a lot of traits in common with autistic people and you have relatives who are autistic. And that's how I classified myself for a long time. I guess I might as well, it's not that involved. Until like when my mother was diagnosed with the terminal cancer and going to be going on hospice, that I was writing an email to my siblings, because I work at night, and so during the day when they were all getting this news and processing it, I missed all the messages. And so then I got home from work and I opened up my personal email and I saw everything kind of tumbling out from the evening prior. And it was just a lot. And I was crying, and I wound up looking closely at my eyes, and I remembered that when I was in first grade, I was taken to the eye doctor, and they said, well, actually, because both my parents needed glasses and two of my older siblings needed glasses. But it turned out that me and my psychiatrist sister both had 20/20 vision when we were children. And so, but they said that my eyes were shifty. And so just kind of in this crisis of learning that my mom was not going to be getting treated for her cancer, and that meant that her death was very soon, and it was the pandemic, and I was a nurse working in mental health, and how that was, basically how I can describe it is that there are high and low seasons, or at least there used to be high and low seasons in mental health. And during the summer, you would not have as many patients because school was out, and it was nice enough for people who want to live outside to just live outside. Whereas during the winter, people are in school, there's seasonal depression, and people who don't like living in houses can't always live outside in that weather. So during the pandemic, as a mental health nurse, we were just always full, no matter what the weather or time of year or anything. We just were full all the time. And I think the most telling thing about the pandemic is that, basically we would get people who'd come in with some kind of suicidal ideation. Like, that would be kind of the triggering criteria for you to be admitted to an inpatient hospital. And so, before the pandemic, we would sometimes get people who didn't really have a plan. They just really were sad and didn't think it mattered whether they lived or died. And they would call that a soft admit. And we, as the pandemic progressed, we didn't really have soft admits as much. And then, I guess kind of a signal to me that the pandemic was really bad. How do you know if the hospital's just always full, so it's 95% utilization of what? So one day we admitted a woman who had gone to the ER and been safety planned home, because that's something you can do. You go to the ER, and if they talk through with you and can safety plan to send you home, then they will. And so if you have people that you live with who are able to support you, or you have access to outpatient resources and things like that. So if there's a plan that you could go home again, then they would tend to do that. But if you had actually articulated a plan, they would tend not to do that. And the more, if you had a very serious lethal plan, they would tend not to do that. And so we had a lady or a person come in who had been safety planned home from the ER despite having plan and access with a gun, which is kind of like the textbook, this is really bad. So the fact that an ER would actually safety plan someone home who was thinking of shooting themselves kind of shows how bad the pandemic was at that point. But maybe she already had an outpatient therapist. That was the other problem in the pandemic, is that the wait to see an outpatient therapist got really ridiculous. And because I was a student, I had access to BetterHelp as a student benefit, and so I wound up using BetterHelp, and that's been interesting. But I never told you what happened that caused my first therapy visit when I was a freshman in high school, which is that I was writing lame poetry and drawing pictures of dead flowers, and I had playing with candles, and let's see, we I don't know. So like I had a candle with water inside the candle. It was an Orangina bottle. And so the candle was stuck in the top of the Orangina bottle, which you can kind of see where this is going. The candle tipped over, it lit some stuff on fire, and I had the water right there because it was inside the bottle and I was able to put it out. But I was just like, holy shit, I almost just burned down my whole house and killed my whole family, and I'm a screw up, So I wrote about this, and then my mom was cleaning my room and found the note. I was like, oh, I guess I better take you to a therapist. So I went to the therapist, but because I didn't want my mom to be upset, because, that's how I was, I told the therapist that everything was really great, or, that I should be okay, or whatever, My mom wanted me to kind of safety plan out, so so I did what my mom wanted. Anyway, there was a time when the MBTI was kind of cool, that my mom had the book Please Understand Me. Although actually the guy who wrote Please Understand Me, he does a lot with the MBTI, but he does even more with temperaments. And basically just the original, classical humor temperaments of, are you sanguine or melancholic or choleric or phlegmatic, And so when my mom got that Please Understand Me book, and this was back in 1988, so laugh if you will, but if you knew what the MBTI was in 1988, that's what we're talking about. So I was the one who came tested up as being the same personality as my mom, and my mom's like, oh, this is so wonderful. Also, me and my mom have the same first name, or she had it. I have it now. And so that's, I guess part of why I felt like it was my job to be her. And as a result of trying to be my mom for the first 22 years of my life, I'm not really sure who I actually am, but whereas she was very, I think, sanguine, I guess, that even though I was somewhere between melancholic and phlegmatic, phlegmatic's the brainy one, right? That because I was always trying to present as being sanguine, that and for a long time I thought that that's basically what borderline personality was, is where you wear a mask all the time and you don't know what's under the mask. I think where I've landed with it, I still don't know what's under my mask, but I know that something is under the mask, and it's okay that I don't know what it is. My mom was an ENFP, and I forget who the historical figure was that they said you could be like if you were an ENFP. I think ultimately I'm more like a INTJ. I'm like really strongly J, and then I'm kind of a toss-up between E and I, or F and S. But I'm pretty strongly, I feel like I'm pretty strongly N over, I can't remember what the other one is. S is the whatever, I'm trying to drive here, so the fact that I can't instantly remember everything is cool. The funny thing is, and I am really interested in theories, and so that is, I guess, part of where my personality probably lies. And I don't think that it was really, like, my mom had a lot of weird theories, and that was kind of possibly a schizotypal thing, whereas I have more interest in, I wouldn't say more real theories, because a theory is a theory, it's not real, but a kind of internal consistent structure to things. Anyway, so that was me in 9th grade. I wound up going to see a therapist because I was scared that I was almost lighting the house on fire. And so let's see. Oh, the Interstate Oasis. We're in Idaho, and they have an interstate oasis, but I don't need an interstate oasis, just that. So that was 9th grade. And then my parents got back together, because remember how I said my mom wanted to be a bold, strong, independent woman? Well, it turned out she couldn't hack it. And I guess like none of us was going to get Christmas gifts really, like of the sort that we had grown up being accustomed to, which wasn't as fancy as some people. Like for us, if you got a bike for Christmas, everything else was going to be like, a paddle ball bouncer or whatever, or a boombox for Christmas. Whereas it felt like a lot of the people we went to school with, because they only had 1 or 2 siblings, that they would get something nice like that from their grandparents for Christmas, and their parents would get them something really nice. I don't know. It felt like that's how things went. Maybe I'm crazy. And this continued to be the case as I raised my kids, is that it's not like one person would get an Xbox for Christmas. It's like we would get an Xbox and everybody would get the Xbox of the family, and then each person would get a game as their Christmas present. It was kind of more the standard of Christmas giving that I grew up with and that we practiced in our family. And my husband, he came from a family of 6, so it wasn't very big for a Utah family, but they were pretty relatively modest in how they raised their children. Anyway, so now I'm in 9th grade. My parents are getting back together, and because of that, I always, for a lot of my early life, I hated Christmas and hated Santa Claus because I associated it with this Christmas when I was 14, where basically my mom reconciled with my dad, which I thought was a bad idea because she couldn't otherwise have gotten us a nice Christmas. Anyway, and I was kind of a jerk about that for a long time. I think that's another thing that isn't a textbook personality disorder symptom, but I think was really characteristic of my personality disorder, is that I would have things that I was negative about, like Christmas, Santa Claus, and anyway, and just kind of not liking things that were very popular. That was kind of my thing. Because they weren't really called goths yet. It was kind of like post-punk, but pre-goth. Because we didn't wear makeup, but we did buy our clothes at the Army-Navy surplus store. I was a bit of a tomboy. I like to read my brother's Boy Scout manuals about how to catch an animal if you're in a survival situation, and how to get dust out of your eye. And these are the flags of all the countries in the world that were important to know in 1978. And these are the faith-based achievement medals for every religion. You know, I love that diagram. Anyway, I love diagrams and information. I really love books about how things worked. I love the anatomy pages, and not because of the nudity in the encyclopedia. It's because there was like 4 cellophane layers, and gosh, I wouldn't give anything, but it would be really cool to look back and see how that was organized now that I've taken anatomy and know more about the human body. I used to just think that the inside of my body was a black, empty, hollow space with, you know, a tube, like as if you were a drinking, wetting doll that went from your mouth to where things come out. But I didn't really know what else all was going on in my body. But when I would be really upset, when I was this angst-ridden teenager, like my arms would hurt, you know. And skipping ahead a little bit to when I was 22 and had a psychiatrist briefly, she's like, so what do you think that was? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it was estrogen, you know. And all I knew was that sometimes I felt awesome, and sometimes I felt really, really bad, and then sometimes I felt nothing. And the apathy was like almost the more disturbing than anything else that could be. And I later saw a meme about it. It's like when you have borderline personality, you feel things very intensely, even when what you feel is nothing at all. And that one is a kind of a signature symptom, is the intense feelings of emptiness, which makes no sense. But you could almost call it like a phantom limb pain of the soul. Woo! Anyway, so that was me up through my parents' first separation and reconciliation, which was like through 9th grade.